Whenever we think of the great leaders of the Crusade era, often the name Saladin is the first name to pop into people's minds, as he was the one who liberated Jerusalem. However, what if we were to tell you that Saladin was actually the prodigy of another great, forgotten hero of Islam? Yes, Nuraddin ibn Zengi, the man who spearheaded the anti-Crusader movement for 18 years before Saladin took over. In our opinion, this legendary hero is certainly an equal to Saladin and deserves more attention. In fact, for those looking into the position of leadership, Nuraddin is a great example of what effective transformational leadership looks like. So, grab a pen and paper, because in this video we will delve into 4 points that made Nuraddin a great leader. But before we start, we kindly request your support by liking this video and leaving a comment. Your contribution will boost our visibility on the YouTube algorithm. And if you haven't by now, give us a subscribe to stay up to date with the latest content on this channel. Jazakallahu khairan. Point 1. Nuraddin understood the importance of leadership and the responsibility he carried. For this reason, he did his uttermost to ensure that the men he appointed were suitable for their position. In one example, his inner circle had noticed that Nuraddin had suddenly become lost in his thoughts after they had just completed the Maghrib Salah. This had been a characteristic that was considered unusual for him, and therefore, when questioned, Nuraddin responded with the following: "By Allah, I am thinking of a ruler whom I appointed, but he was not just with the Muslims, and he oppresses the Muslims who are my friends and assistants. I fear that Allah will question me about it. By Allah, if you see any injustice, you must tell me as fast as you can in order to put an end to it. Otherwise, your salaries would be ill-gotten." If we pause here to analyze the situation carefully, there are a few things that quickly come to mind. First, his fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is clear that from his statement that Nuraddin is conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before making such big decisions, and understood that he would be questioned on the Day of Judgment if he did not rule justly. Secondly, the concern he had for the Muslim populace living under his realm. If we go back to the quote, we can see quite clearly that he went as far as threatening his men with the removal of their wages if they did not report any oppression. This wasn't a man who simply hired his best friends or any family member for the sake of it. Rather, he hired the more capable man based upon what impact he would have on those living under his realm. And to stress upon this last point, when he was asked about a hypothetical situation in which one of his relatives may succeed him, Nuraddin stated the following: "As for my brother Nusrat ad-Din Amir Miran, in the view of what I know of his character and evil deeds, I cannot consent to giving him authority over any of the affairs of the Muslims. Therefore, my choice has fallen upon my brother Amir Qutb ad-Din Mawdud, son of Ahmad ad-Din, governor of Mosul, because of the intelligence, uprightness, piety, and true belief." Note, again, the wisdom of Nuraddin. The distinguishing factors between choosing two of his brothers weren't personal biases or whom he personally loved more than the other, Rather, he stated he would pick Mawdud over his brother due to his piety and intelligence. Essentially, who had been the better candidate to lead the Muslims? There was simply no way that Nuraddin would allow the corrupt and the tyrannical to govern in the lands of Islam. In another quote attributed to him, Nuraddin had reportedly said, "I fear for the subjects and all the Muslims, lest they should come after me ignorant, evil-doing and oppressive governors." And Nuraddin had said this for good reason. After all, Nuraddin was from the Crusade era, and he quickly learned of the evil consequences when the lame and the feeble are in charge of the Muslims. Most significantly, the bloodshed that is spilled and the defenseless situation and vulnerability of the Muslims as a result. Point 2. Nuraddin acted as a shield to Crusader aggression. Since the Crusades had begun, the Muslims had suffered greatly, especially in Jerusalem, where two Christian accounts confirm that the massacres had been so severe at the Masjid al-Aqsa that an actual river of blood was formed. Nuraddin was aware of such atrocities and was eager to defend the Muslims and the Izzah that the Ummah had lost, particularly in the Sham. To exemplify how much he cared, one time when he was attending one of his circles of hadith, the students amongst him noticed that he seemed serious and deep in thought. And when asked why, he responded with the following: "I feel ashamed in front of the Almighty to see me smile while the Franks, i.e. the Crusaders, are besieging the Muslims in Dalmatia." Interestingly enough, Dalmatia in modern-day Egypt had not technically been under his governance. And although his lieutenant Shirkuh had taken hold of it temporarily, Nuraddin's anger was directed at the Crusaders' aggression towards the Muslims, regardless of where they had been. Another example is when he openly criticized Mosul's leaders in 1170 Common Era, stating, "We are obliged to undertake to protect what you have neglected and to free the Muslims from oppression." Now, Nuraddin would eventually annex Mosul, but at the time of this criticism, he was not in charge. So why was he angry? Well, Nuraddin was clearly furious at Mosul's inability to protect its citizens. To stress this point, Nuraddin didn't just pay lip service. He wasn't all talk. In fact, he was a more than capable general and would earn a number of victories against the Crusaders. At one point, the Muslims suffered an unexpected defeat near Antioch, after Nuraddin was caught off guard. When returning back to base, Nuraddin had declared, "By Allah, I shall not shelter under any roof until I revenge myself and Islam." He would then earn a spectacular victory against the combined forces of Crusaders at the Battle of Harim in 1164 Common Era, which included the combined forces of the Armenians, the Byzantines, and the principalities of Antioch and Tripoli. Furthermore, he considered his victories as victories for the Ummah, not for himself. For example, when he annexed the town of Banais, he stated, "By this conquest, the Muslims have a cause of joy." Before moving on, it's worth noting that even the great scholar of Islam, Ibn Taymiyyah, mentions how greatly Nuraddin impacted the lands of Sham in his Majmu' al-Fatawa, stating, "The people of Syria were in the worst condition between the Crusaders and the hypocrites until the martyr Nuraddin emerged. He did what he did for the sake of Islam." Moving on. Point 3. He was a champion of the Sharia. On Nuraddin, Ibn Athir states, he revered the Sharia and stood by its ordinance. And this was evident during his reign. Whenever Nuraddin took over a city, he would abolish all non-Sharia taxes. Furthermore, he would introduce new Islamic madrasas for learning and implemented the Islamic law. Furthermore, he refused to introduce anything that was contradictory to it, famously stating, "Allah, glory be to Him, created people and knows what is best for them. He entitled a law which is for their benefit. People's welfare is achieved perfectly by adopting Islamic law. If there was more benefit in something other than Islamic law, Allah would have prescribed it. So, we are in no need of any other law." One story that illustrates his humbleness towards the Sharia perfectly, however, was when a citizen had lodged a claim against him. The claim itself was futile, and it had been evident to the Qadi that it had been pointless to go with it. However, to everyone's surprise, Nuraddin had turned up to court, and when proven innocent, he would later state, "My only fear was that my motive might have been of me believing I was too mighty and proud to come before the Sharia court. So I attended and then granted him the claim he made." On the more personal level of things, Nuraddin's piety was noticeable by many, even by some of the enemies of Islam such as William of Tyre. He would pray additional voluntary prayers and Qiyam al-Layl and make istikhara before big decisions. He was also knowledgeable of Islam, having studied the Sharia. On his knowledge, Ibn al-Athir wrote, "He was knowledgeable in the law, according to the school of Abu Hanifa, but was not fanatical about it. He studied hadith and passed it on to others, seeking the reward for that." Before moving on, there are 2 points we should first clarify. Firstly, Ibn al-Athir's comment regarding Nuraddin not being fanatical about the school of Abu Hanifa. And this was a reference to the fact that he took from other madhahib as well, and that he opened other madrasas. Therefore, the schools he opened were not exclusive to the Hanafi school of thought. Point 2. The importance of leaders being knowledgeable in Islam. After all, how could one govern by the Sharia without previous knowledge? It is mandatory for the Muslimin to seek knowledge, never mind those in charge. Nuraddin understood this. In fact, he highly respected the scholars and those upon knowledge, and enjoyed being in their company. On this, Ibn al-Athir states, "He used to honor and respect the ulama and men of religion. He gave them gifts and would stand up to receive them. He attended their sessions and relaxed with them." Furthermore, Nuraddin wasn't arrogant. He refused for his followers to exaggerate his feats and success. At one point, an official wanted to attribute something praiseworthy to Nuraddin that he didn't actually do. So Nuraddin stopped him and said, "No lies should be told on the pulpit. I am not happy when I am described with something I do not do." In fact, as a further example of his humbleness, he refused to accept any credit for his success or achievements, stating, "Who is this Mahmud that such should be said of him? Before me, who protected the lands and Islam? That was Allah, besides whom there is no God. Note, Nuraddin referred to himself as Mahmud, his actual name, and not Nuraddin, the title his followers mostly knew him by, and the sincerity in his words and the lack of ego in his statements. Moving on. Point 4. Nuraddin was just. One of the most notable qualities of Nuraddin was his justice. Hence, he would earn the title the Just King, or in Arabic, Al-Malik Al-Adil. A title well earned. And to exemplify why, one could just look at how he governed. For example, Ibn al-Athir mentions that he would find the time to listen to the common man's grievances. Quote, in his land, he built the Hall of Justice, where he and the Qadi used to sit to give justice. And quite astonishingly, Al-Ashtari writes, quote, Nuraddin used to attend 4 or 5 days a week in the courthouse in order to investigate the people's problems to sort them out. And Al-Maqdisi would add, he did not keep a servant or a doorman so that any person could reach him at any time, the weak and the strong and the poor and the rich. Now, if we pause here so that we can ponder on what was actually being said, Nuraddin rahimahullah, despite all his determination to fight the Crusaders, still had the time to solve personal disputes between the people. Just let that sink in for a moment. And these aren't just mere fabrications, there are documented incidences of resolutions that Nuraddin had to deal with. A personal favourite was when he had learned of a young boy's plight. As it were, this young boy's father had been imprisoned because he was unable to pay the rent for a room that belonged to the state's endowments. And to be fair, he hadn't paid any of the rent for an entire year. Despite this, the boy came to Nuraddin and complained. When Nuraddin learnt of the incident, he asked those in charge, how much is the rent for a year? They would reply, 150. He, Nuraddin, would respond, we will give him this amount annually in order to be able to pay the rent of the room. Moreover, he ordered the release of his father from prison. Again, subhanallah, Nuraddin was able to aid this young boy and his father with his personal wealth. Again, make this comparison to some of the billionaires with power today, and you could already see a difference. Furthermore, he built hospitals, donated money to the orphans, and opened up his realm for the Muslims who were seeking refuge from the Crusader aggression. His citizens, even before his own family. For example, when his wife got a little greedy and demanded more finance from him, he had informed her, I have nothing but this. For everything in my hands, I am a custodian for the Muslims, and I will not betray them, nor will I wade into the hellfire because of you. It cannot be expressed how important a just ruler is in Islam. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ informs us that a just ruler will be amongst the 7 people protected under the throne of Allah on the Day of Judgment. Final thoughts. Reflecting upon the life of Nuraddin, the question is often asked, how was it that Nuraddin was able to judge between disputes, spend much time in ibadah, and fight the Crusaders? And subhanallah, part of the reason was that he was ascetic, meaning he didn't care about the dunya and knew what to prioritize. As a result, Nuraddin was working on a blessed time and able to achieve much more than the average individual. He would say regarding the dunya, It escapes from those who seek it and seeks those who escape from it. When reflecting on the life of Nuraddin, this following hadith comes to mind. The Prophet Muhammad said, Allah the Exalted had said, I will declare war against him who shows hostility to a pious worshipper of mine, and the most beloved thing with which my slave comes near to me is what I have enjoyed upon him, and my slave keeps on coming closer to me through performing nawafil, till I love him. When I love him, I become his hearing, with which he hears, his seeing, with which he sees, and his hand with which he grips. And if he asks something from me, I will give him, and if he asks my protection, I protect him. It is often said whether leaders are born or made, and in our opinion, they are actually made. So for those who are looking to acquire a position of leadership, make sure you have the right role models. And we will finish off from this quote from the 14th century scholar and historian from Medina, Ibn Farhun, who writes the following on Nuraddin. Nuraddin was a just and devout king who adhered to Islamic law, inclined towards good people, and struggled in the way of Allah. He regularly performed prayers in congregations devoted to the recitation of the Quran, and was self-controlled in his food and clothing expenses. He was careful in his speech, never speaking obscenely, whether in satisfaction or frustration. The most pleasing thing to him was a word of the truth, and he could hear of the guidance to a sunnah that he could follow.
والذين يقولون ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما.
We highly recommend reading more about this great hero of Islam, and for those who want to watch more videos on Nuraddin, check out these following videos on the history of the Ummah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.